And we're live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Stripe Developer Office Hours. My name is Cecil Phillip, and today we have some folks here from some teams at Stripe, and they're going to be talking to us about using events, and particularly using thin events, which are a new and exciting capability that we've now released for you folks to try out and start using. If this is your first time being here at Office Hours, welcome. Generally, what we do here is we have conversations with you know PMs, developers, open source maintainers, people inside and outside of the Stripe organization to kind of just talk about some of the cool and interesting projects that they're working on. If you have any particular topics or anything that you'd like to see, definitely feel free to let us know, and we can make sure that we add it to the queue for a future episode. Now, my guests today I have Joe and Trey, and they're going to be joining us to talk about events. So, Joe, why don't we start off with you, since you're the first one I see on my screen. Why don't we just do a quick introduction, tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do here at Stripe.
Cool. I'm Trey Sadowski. I lead the API events team. It's the team that's building out our new events infrastructure and building this thing that we call thin events that makes it easier to handle, subscribe to, and work with asynchronous stuff coming from Stripe.
Awesome. And Trey, what about you, sir?
Hey, my name is Trey. Trey Nguyen. I'm a product manager, Joe's partner in crime on the product side, and spend my day trying to make it easier for all of our users to integrate with Stripe events.
Awesome. Well, why don't we just kick it off with a quick round of updates? I'm going to bring up my screen, and we're going to go through some of the things that have happened recently over the last couple of weeks. Now, we just came off of our flagship event here at Stripe, Stripe Sessions, and that happened May 6th through 8th. So just about a month ago. And there were tons of interviews, tons of announcements, and all kinds of stuff that were happening. Well, if you head over to our Stripe Developers YouTube channel right now, you'll see we have a playlist of, again, different interviews and product announcements, speaking to different folks that were actually live at sessions, covering some of the announcements that were made and so on and so forth. So if you're interested to get a little bit of an inside peek as to what happened at sessions and what was announced, this will be a good place for you to go ahead and check some of that out. And Trey, I think you did an interview here as well, right? Like you're in one of these videos, I believe, aren't you?
Yeah, I think a couple of months ago. So hopefully y'all have watched that one.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So this happens. Here's an article that we published 2 days ago. So this was on Monday. So our friends from DocuSign, wrote a blog post that talks about how you can kind of integrate Stripe APIs with DocuSign APIs using their agreement management platform and capabilities. So again, if folks are using DocuSign for signing contracts or agreements or anything of the sort, and then you want to kind of plug that into your payment workflows with Stripe, this would be a great blog post for you to go ahead and check out. Other thing I want to mention, so some folks that may or may not know this, but our team has been doing meetups across Stripe offices across the globe. And I think our next meetup is actually happening next week in Chicago. So if any of you folks happen to be in Chicago, particularly on June 12th, so that'll be next week Wednesday, right? With today being today is the 4th, right? So that'll be next week Wednesday in Chicago. We'll be having this Stripe meetup. So it'll be food and drinks, and there'll be technical talks, there'll be demos. We'll have product team folks there, there'll be DevRel folks there, there'll be community folks there, and I'll just kind of sharing and talking about like how we build integrations and things of that nature. So again, if you're in Chicago, definitely feel free to come over and hang out and say hi, or join the festivities with us. We'd really appreciate that very much. All right, so that's going to be it for now in terms of our announcements. So I'm going to take my screen off really quick. And Trey, why don't we get started with you, right? Like I know, like you said, like you're one of the PMs that works on eventing in general when it comes to Stripe, right? But for people that don't know, what are Stripe events and why do we have them? Like what is the real purpose behind these events that we trigger?
Yeah, sure. I mean, here at Stripe, and what a lot of our users are actually seeing as well is commerce is changing. It's getting more and more complex and asynchronous day after day. You have things like the state of subscriptions that take time to unfold over time. You have things like regulatory compliance, such as like 3DS, which again takes time to unfold. Even payment methods, there are newer payment methods that also take time to unfold. And as these things unfold, our users need to be aware of them to extract some business value, right? Let's say as a subscription slowly moves from to an activated state, you may want to dynamically provision permissions for the user to access your platform. Or when a payment has succeeded, you may want to fill and ship them their item. And a lot of these are very business critical. And so the way we see at Stripe is as activity occurs in your Stripe account in the world of commerce, your businesses need to be apprised of this. And simply the volume of activity that occurs is just not scalable to pull for this data, which is why we want to provide an easy way for companies and our users to plug into the Stripe ecosystem and through events to be apprised of everything that's going on and reacting and triggering their business flows from this.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when I see a lot of folks demo a payments integration, and when I say demo, I mean like there's no payments actually in it, but they're just kind of like mocking whatever it is that what else they're trying to show off. They always make it seem like the payment is instantaneous. It makes it seem like it's a request response type of engagement, right? And so the minute that I say pay, regardless of whether I'm using a credit card or a bank account or a digital wallet or whatever the case is, it makes it seem like this instantaneous process that happens. But in reality, it's a lot more complicated than that, right? And then there's a lot of other things that happen, different statuses. What did it fail? Was it successful? Right? Is it pending? Is it ready? If you think about invoices, you think about the different states that invoices kind of move through, right? And you might want to do different things inside of your application based on how we move in and out of those states, right? So it sounds to me like realistically, we almost need to have these events because we need to let developers, customers, people that are integrating with our services know, hey, well, what exactly is happening with the movement of these objects, right? And objects as in like the invoices or the payments or even creating new customers, right? Like I need to know what's happening so that I can react to it in my own code, right? So I'm guessing that's one of the reasons too, right? Like where we have those things.
Yep. Yeah, you're right on. And a lot of times in these demos, we show you like a very simple example of payments, but there are so many other payment. Like for example, there's a payment method in Mexico called OXXO where the flow is once you receive a QR code, and then you go to a local gas station, and then you pay that, and you have X amount of days in between that may happen, and when that payment method may succeed, and you need to be, as a merchant, you want to be aware of when that happens. The user may not pay instantaneously and may take days later to go to their gas station to pay. So these are just some examples that like you said, it's very important to be apprised of this data.
I'm wondering, outside of us just notifying people stuff that happened, when we give them these events, when they receive them, what are some of the things that you've seen our customers do with those events? Like what are some, I don't know, workflows or processes that you think are pretty typical for people that are listening to events that generate from Stripe?
Yeah. Generally at a high level, we usually see kind of two buckets of use cases. The first is kind of more of the examples that I was alluding to earlier, where you're triggering some kind of business flow from a commerce activity. And the second is more about keeping your systems in sync. So starting with the first one, some of the core major popular examples we usually see is fulfillment during processes, right? Like, during purchases. When a payment succeeds, you want to fulfill that order. Managing permissions and platform entitlements as subscription state machine changes, right? Handling disputes, handling regulations like 3DS and guiding users to complete those successfully. And then the last one is like if you're using Connect as a marketplace, managing the onboard process for your merchants. So those are kind of like the 5 core groups of business commerce flows that we see folks use events for. Yeah. And the other examples are more like keeping your systems in sync with the activities that's occurring on Stripe, whether it's synchronizing your customer data to your CRMs, synchronizing your entitlements to an internal database, so you can so your application can hit that database hot to know if the user has an active subscription or not. Synchronizing invoices and payments with like ERPs and accounting systems.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that use case, to be honest with you, because again, Stripe in and of itself, like we do one thing, right? And now the other systems that make up the rest of your application need to have a lot of this information. And I know for a lot of folks, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. A lot of folks use us like a database, right? Like we are the product database. We are the custom database, or at least we're the source of truth for some folks as they build their integrations. So definitely, I think it's important for people to know, oh, okay, these things have mutated. They're different, they're changed. They've gone through these different transitions, and these are what the transitions are, and this is when they happen. And so now, like you said, we're able to plug into a CRM, plug into our ERP, plug into, I don't know, maybe Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or any of those types of tools, right? To kind of like update those backend systems so that they can know, okay, well, this is what the state of the world happens to be, at least when it comes to like, you know, our customer product payments information.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you bring up a good point. Like sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap thinking from Stripe, oh, our users are just interacting with Stripe and us. But in reality, they're interacting with a bunch of systems. And this whole theme of like extensibility, allowing data to flow through Stripe, from Stripe, outside of Stripe, within Stripe, is something that we're heavily investing in with, you know, our products such as like events. And also if y'all maybe if y'all are watching sessions, we also launched workflows as well, which is like another layer of extending Stripe.
Yeah, we got to get the team from Workflows on here too, because I think that'll be a really interesting conversation. And so for folks, if you haven't seen Workflows, like I mentioned before, like that that playlist that we mentioned earlier does have some demos, and you know, you can kind of see what Workflows looks like if you haven't seen it before. Question for you two. So we're here to talk about thin events, but I'm guessing before thin events, there were, I won't call them fat, but they're chunkier events, right? They're bigger events that we typically have been sending to folks, you know, for a long time now, right? Can you tell me a little bit about like what's like what exactly is that snapshot event? I guess is what we officially call it. Like what does a snapshot event look like? What does it hold? Like what are, you know, how do folks look at that? And then I guess we can kind of get into a conversation about like, well, how are we moving from these snapshot events over to thin events?
Yeah, so snapshot events they contain a full copy of the resource that changed at the time of the change, and that's then sent down to your web server exactly as it was at that time, based on the version that you've subscribed to. So it kind of embeds the versioning and the current state of the world in the payload that we push to you. That's why we call it snapshot. The thin events, on the other hand, are a little bit, they redact some of that, and it's a versionless push payload. So the snapshot events have a couple downsides that we're really trying to work through with the thin events. One of the major ones is that version locking. It makes it really hard to upgrade these things because you have to keep your on Stripe version that we're sending down to you in sync with the SDK version and that you're using to parse the events and understand what's going on inside of them. That, and then the fact that they can come out of order because of retries and so forth. The internet is an unpredictable place. You can get into a situation where if you're relying on the payload that we send you, it becomes out of date, stale, and your systems could get out of sync with Stripe and cause some really not great behaviors accidentally if you're not careful about how you handle them. So these are like kind of the fundamental principles that we're trying to address with the thin events world that we're building now.
Got it. So then the main thing for me is, because I think about when I build Stripe integrations, and you know, maybe I'm using the CLI or I'm using some event destination, and so now like I get this payload that has a lot of stuff in it, right? And then looking at the docs, you realize, okay, well there is some structure to this, right? Like this snapshot event has an events definition, but then in the data section of it, it has like the thing that changed, right? The thing may be the customer, the invoice, the payment intent, the charge, but it has that in it. And so typically when these events are fired, and for anyone that's done an integration before knows that we fire a lot of them. It's a chunky payload, right? And so, like you said, you talked about things like it being stale and whatnot. And then there's also the bandwidth costs, you know what I mean? I'm sure the expensiveness of both generating them and then us as developers parsing them and kind of like pulling out the data we want on our side. And then having to make even additional requests, right? Think about the expands functionality that we had in our V1 APIs of, hey, I have this structure, but I want to get this structure with other stuff too, right? Like I think about how heavy these objects are. So I'm guessing what the thought process is that thin events now are going to kind of alleviate some of those concerns, at least when it comes to, like you said, staleness, and then also the chunkiness of, again, serializing is an expensive dev operation. Serializing and deserializing payloads is an expensive dev operation. So also like easing, the performance burden of that as well for developers.
Totally. Yeah. We really want users to sort of like fall into this pit of success that we're talking about here. Basically, we want you to start adopting behaviors of like pulling down the latest version of the resource when you're doing data sync instead of relying on that snapshot, so that whatever you're doing in your like subscription processing, I think is probably the best example of this. You always want the most latest up-to-date version of the subscription, and to get that, you need to pull it down from the Stripe servers. So really what you want to do is use that event, even if it has the full payload of what the object was at the time where the change happened.
Mm-hmm.
You want to pull the latest because something could have changed in that time, and you always want to know that you're syncing to the latest.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. When this was first announced, I had one question that was really on the top of my head, and that was around rate limiting. So I think about, okay, I'm getting this payload, right? Like you sent me this event, I've gotten this payload out of it, and I might have multiples of these events. But now I have to make, within events, I have to make another API request. Maybe not another, because I'm getting one, I never was receiving one before, right? Like I'm making an API request to actually get up-to-date information. But I'm wondering, hey, does that affect how we look at rate limiting at all? Would that affect how, because I'm guessing now developers will have to make more requests, right, to get the information they want. Like, is there a concern there that we should be thinking about as people integrating with events?
We're trying to make sure that that's not a concern for our users. Today, it kind of could be, but as we roll these thin events out more, we're going to work with the product teams that own those different various areas that we might see an increased load on to adjust rate limits where it makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. And so thin events today are, can we say this is a released feature? Can we say it's an evolving feature? Like what would we call the status of the integration of that within the Stripe platform at the moment?
You want to take it, Trey?
Yeah. Well, the product of thin events is already rolled out right now for our API v2 resources and APIs. Which includes some of the preview, the new preview resources that we did a big launch on, such as Accounts v2, and also includes the usage-based billing, which we released last year. Now, obviously, most of our users are using API v1 resources, such as subscriptions and invoices, and we want to bring all this value of thin events to those users. And so we're working right now to launch support for API v1 through thin events sometime later in this within these next 6 months, which we'll be releasing first as a private preview. So if there is any interest in our reviewers to be part of that private preview, please email us and let us know. And Cecil, I'm pretty sure you could highlight our email there. Yeah, that's the state of the world right now.
So for folks that have integrations today, we don't have to worry about all our existing event integrations being switched at some point and then all of a sudden becoming thin events. Right. Snapshot events are going to be around. They're not being deprecated, I'm assuming.
Correct.
But
Yep.
we're just adding a different event type now that people could attach to, can listen to, can work with. And I'm assuming at some point, as time goes on, you're just going to support more event types, just like we do with snapshot events. But I'm also going to guess that there's no more snapshot events. We're not adding any additional ones as Stripe goes on. We're only going to be adding thin events. Is that fair?
The split's a little bit different than that. It's really more about if you all have heard of the V2 namespace or
Mhm.
API. All of our V2 APIs emit thin events natively,
Mhm.
and actually it's a slightly different internal versioning framework that makes a lot of the things much nicer and will be more seamless and more consistent with how the rest of the API and the events will be a little bit more consistent as far as their versioning strategy. Whereas if you look at Snapshot, there's some oddities around events are versioned in a slightly different way than the rest of the API. So we are. I've totally lost my train of thought.
No, that's fine.
Apologies.
But one of the things I was looking at too, because so our API documentation, and you know what I'll do is I'll actually bring up my screen for 2 seconds or so. If folks want to head over to our API documentation and see an example of what thin events are available, right? So like this is our API docs over in docs, Stripe docs. So these are some of the V2 events that are available today, right? So Trey, like you were mentioning, these V2 events are all thin events, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And for folks that may have already integrated with Stripe and using like the snapshot events, you can expect to see all those snapshot events being supported as thin events in the very near future here. So this list will grow, and and obviously, like you said, we'll continue to support snapshot events. So don't be worried. Like we won't be pulling the rug under your integrations. It'll still be supported, but you'll see increasing more investment in thin events with more event types being added here for the new V2 APIs, which is only available in thin events.
Awesome. Gotcha.
Yeah. And I think to follow up to what you were asking before, we're not exactly stopping adding new snapshot events. We'll still continue to add those when it makes sense and lines up with the needs of API v1 resources. Those in the future will then also be translated to thin events, and we'll offer kind of thin events. We'll have the superset of all events that you could subscribe to on Stripe.
Got it. Another thing I know that we have to deal with, and we as like folks that are integrating in Stripe have to deal with, is the different versioning schemas. So again, for folks that are familiar, if I go into my Stripe account and I go into my dashboard, I know that my account has an API version, but then as I'm creating like an event destination or webhook or anything of the sort, there's a different version for that, right? Or I can specify different versions for that, right? So it's almost like there can be a couple of different things happening there, right? What is the versioning situation like when we think about thin events? Are we gonna try and deal with that too, or like how are we thinking about versioning and thin events?
I think we were showing some of the documentation earlier. I think looking at that will really kind of nail this and really clearly explain it. So one cool thing that we've done, if you can expand one of these, I think.
Sure.
Okay, cool. This is a great example. So if you scroll up a little bit, you can see on the right side there's an event payload. So what we're doing, if you can scroll, I don't know why that's so small on this
I
one.
have
They're
no
usually
idea.
a bit bigger. Maybe choose a different language. It might expand.
Sure.
In the event handler drop down.
Let's do this with that. Okay, there you go.
That's a little bit more. So basically what you can see is this payload is tiny. That's sort of why we call it thin. This is the thing that we'll send to your web server as like a signal that the event happened.
Sure.
You can then call back to us and expand it. So the interesting thing about this is that it contains things that we are comfortable saying are versionless and won't change. And so whatever SDK version you're using, when you go to pull the related resource or more information about the event, which you'll see in the bottom section after the dark gray box of how to fetch it, you'll get that richer set of information that is versioned. So any before and after of the resource that changes will be in that section because that is a versioned construct, as well as in this event is actually pretty interesting because it has a new feature of thin events, which is additional data. If you scroll down a little bit to the fetched payload.
1 second. There we go.
Cool. Do you see how the stuff that's grayed out here is what we pushed you? You'll get it back when you pull from our server when you call to the get event data API, but you're also getting this sort of grouping of like data that is custom to that specific event. So you can see that this event happened and it's about account 1RIY. It's configured as a recipient and it's from an onboarding flow. So there's this richer dialect with the thin events that can happen as the product designers are designing their APIs and their events. That's pretty cool as well.
Okay, nice. Another thing that I know that we do, and I know, folks, in a second we're gonna get to a demo. I know everyone is like, show me the code, and let's kind of dive into it. When I think about integrating with events, I know there's like a process, right? I know there's webhook signatures and keys. I know that there's endpoints that I have to send my requests to. Does any of that change from a developer perspective, or are we doing the same thing but with just different event types?
It's the same thing. There are some flows that get easier, which I'll highlight. But in general, a lot of the core flows of setting a webhook is pretty much the same. You want to send it to HTTPS endpoint. You want to parse it. You want to use our helpers maybe to verify the signature. That remains the same. The flows that get a little easier, I would say the first is like the upgrade flow. Like Joe was walking through, the event, the payload that we send your handlers are unversioned, right? So that means now you only need to manage the version on your handler, your SDK version, your client side. You don't need to manage any version on Stripe, which means when you upgrade, it's just upgrading one side versus doing the dance and figure out your version configuration drift across both sides, both in Stripe and your client. The other flows that I think gets a little easier within events is in thin events we have a concept of what we call platform events, where we want to emit an updated event every time, a created, updated, deleted event every time a resource has mutated. This sounds very simple, but in Snapshot events, this concept isn't consistent across all API resources, right? So you have, for example, an invoice. We give you an invoice update every time an invoice mutates. But for payment methods, we don't give you the payment method update every time it updates. If it updates asynchronously, we have a different event. This makes it a little harder when you write your code, right? Because if you want to be alerted, if you want to tell your code every time a payment method updates, you have to now write a case switch clause and understand that, okay, there's these two event types that represent all the mutations that happen. Right. I'm going to react to it. Versus in thin events, you can write a more your control flow logic looks a little more simpler because you can just simply react to the created, updated, deleted event, knowing that it encapsulates all the mutations that you're needed. So those two kind of flows get a little easier. Writing control flow logic for reacting to all resource mutations as well as the upgrade flow. The rest of the flows generally stay the same as you would with Snapshot handlers.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess that's good to know. Trey, I know you have a demo available. Would you mind bringing up your screen and maybe we could start looking at some stuff?
Yeah. Give me 1 second to set this up.
That'd be great. And then while you do that, for folks that are in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and paste this link that we just showed a few seconds ago that has the different types of events that are available today. So if you're interested in taking a look through those, you can definitely go ahead and do that. And what we'll also do is after this video is done and recorded and all that type of stuff, we'll update the description. We can include any type of links or resources in the description as well, so you can make use of those too.
Cool. So I'm sharing my screen now. Let me know if you see it.
Yep. Bring it up. And I'm seeing rocket rides is what I'm taking.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'll kind of walk through a demo highlighting all the key points about thin events and walking through how a developer for this fictional company called Rocket Rides might use thin events and to create their business flows from commerce activity at Stripe. So for this demo, I'll be playing as a dev from Rocket Rides. Rocket Rides is similar to Uber, but they do airfare. So it's a marketplace that connects pilots with riders. Yeah, this isn't a real service. I wish it was. But yeah, so and Rocket Rides uses the new V2 accounts API in order to have a unified representation of both their pilots and riders. And so we'll be walking through how they use some of the thin events for their V2 accounts and integrate against that. So earlier we saw this page, which is our API ref. So I won't go into too much detail about this, but this is usually one of the first places where a developer may start to explore what kind of event types they need. The other place you can go to is if you log into Rocket Rides dashboard, you can pull up this widget on the bottom. We call this Workbench. This is the home of all your developer tools. Here we have an events tab where you can see all the activity that occurs within your account. This is another great place to kind of get a feel for what activity may I want to react to that is occurring. Here I see some very interesting events. This specific event sounds really interesting to me. It's V2 core.account configuration merchant capability status update. This event specifically lets me know when a merchant, or in my case, a pilot has a new capability. For example, they can now start accepting payments because once they do, I may want to email them or let them know in the application that they can now start getting rides, right? And they're ready to be fully onboarded onto my platform. So let's integrate with this. So as we integrate with this, we can head over to the webhooks tab. This is where you can set up new event destinations and tell Stripe where you want Stripe to send your events to. But before doing that, I know I want to create a webhook endpoint. And so it's really helpful for me to first develop this locally, right? So Stripe has this local listener feature, which is really nice because it allows Stripe to forward all our events from this account straight to your local development machine, make it easier so you don't have to set up any tunneling yourself, and allows you to test your code locally.
Trey, we should probably point out that you're in a sandbox to do all of this stuff. Sending your events from production to your locals, not really a great idea. But so jump into a sandbox to test this stuff out, and it's pretty easy to test that way.
Yep, no, that's a great call out. And obviously I'm in a sandbox here. You can see by this bar right here. So when you're setting up a local listener, you can use our Stripe CLI to do this. You log in and you run a listen command, and I'll run that right now. So to show y'all. So hopping over to my IDE, let me know if y'all can see this.
Yeah, we're looking at VS Code right now.
Sweet. Okay, cool. So I have a very, very simple webhook handler already pre-written here, which we'll go through in a minute. But the first thing I want to do is first run that Stripe, set up my local listener so that I can forward all events to my handler here. So here I'm running the command, Stripe listen. I'm forwarding only thin events. I'm forwarding that to my local machine on this port. And I'm specifically forwarding the capability status update event that I'm personally interested in. So we can click this, we can run this. Great, the local listener set up. It's spitting me out a secret. So let me copy the secret. And put
This
it.
is while he does this, I'll just interject and say it's extremely important to use the secrets that we give you to verify the payload, so you know that the things that are coming into your webhook handler are from Stripe and verified good. The internet's a wild place, and you definitely want to make sure that the data you're receiving is legitimately coming from Stripe.
Sweet. Yep. So cool. So I have the webhook secret plugged in here. We can quickly go over the handler before I run the application real quick. As you can see, we pull in our API key, we pull in our secret. And for a handler, once we get the handler, we use one of our new SDK helpers here, parse in events, to parse the event and verify the secret. I'm writing some log statements so that we can see it in action and kind of visualize it concretely. We can use the retrieve function here to pull down the fetch payload, so we can get additional data about that event, which we saw earlier in the docs. When you pull some of these events, you get that additional highlighted data hash that you can access. And here I wrote some switch case statements. I only wrote one case for this specific event, the capability status update. But if this was a more complex integration, you'd probably see much more cases for each of the individual different event types. But here for this, you can see we also can use this new fetch related object to get the whole entire object from our API, so that we can access those fields, and it's going to be the latest state, so you're not dealing with application errors of out of order deliveries.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone caught it, but there was like a very subtle thing when you moused over fetch related object. The type is actually, if you mouse over it, it's a V2 core account. So you actually get back a strongly typed account object from this instead of just a generic object holder. It's pretty neat.
Huh. That's interesting. And so are all the V2 event types strongly typed? Is that
yes, in most of our SDKs, yeah.
Got it.
And we're working on making it even better in the future, as well as some various experimental ways of doing event handlers as well that stay tuned for.
Gotcha. To be continued. Nice.
Sorry to interrupt your flow, Trey.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, that's the case statement here. I have a default in case any event goes in that's unhandled that we don't have a case statement for, and then a catch statement in case we have any error outs. Sweet. Anything else to highlight here, Joe, before
I'd say if you scroll down, the default case is pretty important here. It's pretty good it's one of our best practice recommendations to only send things to your event handlers that you're really wanting to handle, that you're going to handle. So this, if you look through your logs and you see a bunch of unhandled event types, you can go into the Stripe workbench and adjust your webhook subscription and remove those events, because your code's just not doing anything with them. It's extra load on your servers that you don't need.
Gotcha. So I know when we're working in VS Code, and you showed the local event listener as well, Trey. I'm guessing when I run the CLI, I have the option to forward, like you're showing here, thin events, but I can do thin events and snapshot events at the same time if I wanted to, right? When I say at the same time, not to the same endpoint, but I could have a command that says, "Hey, send these events to this place and send these events to another place." Is that a thing?
You could. The reason why we had designed the CLI to have different arguments and commands for thin and snapshot is because we don't recommend necessarily sending both thin and snapshots to the same handler.
Yeah.
So and mainly that's because, as you can see in the code, the
workflow is a little bit different.
Yeah, the code's a little bit different. The way even the helpers that you use to parse it to verify it is a little different, and we want to make that very, very clear here. So
yeah, you'll also need different signature verification. Like the secrets are going to be different for thin and snapshot events today as well.
Got it. Okay.
So we definitely recommend two separate handlers at this time, just to make it very seamless.
Gotcha.
You could then, once you've done all the parsing and whatnot, you could trigger common under the hood code, which is probably a good practice.
Okay, and I think that's important to know, because I can imagine folks trying to use the same webhook secret for both of them, right? So I think that's a good call out for folks to keep in mind. I know we've said it already, but like I think it's a good thing to repeat is that these are two separate keys, webhook secret keys that are going to be used for verification.
Yep, and when you actually go and create your event destination, you'll find this experience to be the same as well. Like an event destination can only either receive thin or snapshot events, and so if you're dealing with both, you'll have to have at least two different destinations. Each of those has different secrets in the UI.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now I know we're kind of like going down this route a little bit of not only just showing thin events, but also talking about like how to handle them and what are some of the patterns and practices we should use with those. One of the things I like to tell people to do when I handle events is, we should try and return quickly once we get the event, right? Like, so return an okay or some successful response code, HTTP response code, but then actually handle your event in like some type of background process or the sort, right? The reason I'm saying that is because I know Stripe, we have this retry mechanism that if we take too long, we're going to retry, or we're going to try to resend that event to that endpoint, right, to that destination. Is the retry semantics the same for thin events, or does it have different retry, I don't know, configuration and settings?
Yeah, it should be exactly the same.
Okay. So now anything that we need to think about in terms of like retries, in terms of duplication, like I received the same event multiple times, like any of those types of safeguards that we would have built in before for snapshot event types, we could do the same thing for thin event types as well.
Exactly.
Yep. Correct.
And we really do recommend making sure that your code can either absorb the duplicates that it might get through if you're doing our best practice of fetching the latest and updating your systems based on the latest. If you get the same thing multiple times, that's not an issue. If you're more like triggering some code on your own side, you may want to record, hey, I received this event and triggered this workflow because of it. And then next time you see that event ID, you wouldn't do that processing. It's pretty rare for duplicates to flow through, but the internet's a wild place. Things can go wrong in transmission. So things like that do happen, and you should make sure that your code is prepared for it.
That's fair. Would you say that depending on the type of event destination, and I'm just talking shop now at this point, depending on the type of event destination, would that matter as much? So HTTP is one thing, but if we use a different event destination like AWS Event Bridge, you know what I mean? I know I can assume they have their own sets of retries and safeguards and durability when it comes to eventing. Should we look at those two things differently in terms of like the reliability of how the events are sent, or no? I don't know if that question makes sense. Let me know.
The reliability of us delivering events through EventBridge is extremely high. We're going directly to AWS infrastructure, and our delivery rates are like basically first attempt all the time. What happens within EventBridge and how you handle that and how you sequence it, where you send it, it's really up to you how you do that. And there are definitely mechanisms within there where they can help with any deduplication, but for the most part, we're not usually getting duplicates into that stream.
Right. So then I'd almost want to say, like, using those non-HTTP. I say non-HTTP because I don't know what protocol you're using to talk to EventBridge with, but I'm assuming like those other types of event destinations probably have a little bit more reliability, I suppose, at least when it comes to like handling duplicates and retries and those types of things, versus like me just having a regular HTTP endpoint
Yeah,
in the public cloud.
there's a little bit there's a little bit more flexibility on how you do it, right? Because you can configure how the retries work within EventBridge, for example, right? And it's not Stripe retrying, it's how you've configured your AWS setup to retry.
Okay, that's fair. And Trey, I know you worked on event destinations as well, right? So I mean, as in like the destination that we're sending these places to. And so I think today we have two destinations. Well, technically three, I suppose, because there's the local one. I guess we can call that a destination, as well as like a webhook endpoint and AWS Amazon Event Bridge. I'm sorry. Are there any plans to support other protocols or other places that we can send our events to in the maybe not in the near future, but like in the coming year or two?
Yeah, right now we're cooking up support for Azure Event Grid, which is like similar queuing service just in Azure.
Sure.
So you can probably expect that in the next like 6 to 8 months. Again, like we'll release that as a private preview first. So just like within events, if you have any feedback on this or you want to be plugged in with the private preview, email us. Like we can give you access to that when it's ready.
I'm going to bring a question that I heard from someone else. So this is not my original question, but with things like event destinations and even with workflows, which is another feature that we have, but also related to events. A lot of folks have been asking about infrastructure as code for Stripe, if that makes sense. So like, how can I provision my event destinations or create, use APIs to create these capabilities? And I say capabilities because we're not talking about like a customer or a product or a payment. More so, we're talking about like the pipe that like, transfers or, controls where the event goes or, things of that nature. I mean, are there ways that we could programmatically create event destinations and manipulate those things today or not so much?
Yeah, we have a API called V2 Core Event Destinations, where you can programmatically set up these destinations.
Oh, nice.
And when we launched Amazon Event Bridge, we worked with AWS team to actually release a cloud
formation
template. Yeah, I always forget that name. Cloud formation template to spin up, the end-to-end flow of the AWS resources as well as the event destination on Stripe to get a event going through.
That's awesome. Because as I'm doing my CI/CD, workflow, then we can kind of plug some of that stuff together, and that'll work too. So that's good to know.
And if people are using Terraform, there's a community Terraform provider for Stripe that'll allow you to set up your webhooks as well. That's pretty interesting.
Nice. And I just included the link here at the bottom of the screen. There you go. So if folks are interested in checking it out, and it's on GitHub too, so definitely feel free to head over there and try it out. Send PRs because PRs are always welcome, and let us know what you think about it. All right, folks. So I think we're getting close to the end. I think we covered a lot of stuff today. I definitely appreciate the both of you coming on to talk to us about Thin Events and like how Stripe is thinking about eventing in general and the impacts that it's having to developers. After folks have seen this, right? Like now, okay, I've just spent 45 minutes sitting down and listening to y'all do demos and talk about all these amazing things. Like, how do I get started with this? Like, what are some places that I could start playing around with it? Do I have SDK supports? Do I need to get a beta SDK? Like, what are the things I can do to start using some of these capabilities today?
Yeah, if you use any of the new V2 APIs, you essentially can get started using Thin Events today. They're already supported today. If you're not using the V2 APIs, then you'll have to kind of wait until we support V1 within events, which will come soon. So
Okay.
Again, email us if you're interested in that private preview. And you can also check out our docs. We to read more documentation on how the events work, as well as the API ref. But I would say those are the best two places to get started.
Okay, so you did mention an email, so I'm going to bring up the email real quick so folks can take a look at it. So it's events singular -destinations -feedback@stripe.com. So this is where you folks could email the team, share feedback, thoughts, queries, questions, concerns around eventing and around event destinations specifically. And then I'm also going to bring up a link to the documentation as well. So again, if you want to go ahead and learn more about some of the different event types that are available and event destinations that you could kind of plug into, how to set that up in your AWS account if you're using EventBridge, definitely feel free to go ahead over here and check that out as well. Cool. Well, gentlemen, like I said, this has been great. For all of you that have been watching, thank you so much for spending an hour of your afternoon with us, or your morning, depending on wherever you are in the world. We are going to be back next week for another Stripe Developer Office Hours. I think next week we will be talking about, I don't remember who we have next week. Come back next week and you'll find out. But we're going to have a great guest next week. It's going to be fun. Thank you all for watching. Thank you too for being on here. And
thanks for having us.
And again, if you have any questions about events, eventing, event destinations, feel free to reach out to Joe and Trey. You saw the email. You know the URLs that you can go ahead and check out. Also, make sure you head over to our Discord channel as well, because we have tons of folks in there that are talking and sharing information and things of that nature. So with that being said, again, thank you all so much, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.